Cool. James, so great to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out for the show today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You bet. So before we get into your work, I want to know this. 6 years ago, this pandemic was changing everybody, changing our lives, the way we operate. How did you get through the coronavirus era, and how has it influenced the way that you live and work today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it changed for me both personally and professionally in really profound ways. That the first was we had just relocated actually from New York, funny enough, in our conversation to Miami. So getting acclimated to that new environment, brand new city for us. And I was there to one, get out of New York, but also to grow our footprint domestically across the United States. So becoming part of that environment, and having kind of this brand new opportunity, was kind of interesting that it was cut short just because COVID happened. So I moved down in August of 2019. Obviously, March of 2020 came around and everything kind of came to a halt. However, professionally speaking, I was busier than ever. Our team was busier than ever, mostly because there were more eyes on screens than ever before. And in our line of work, we are responsible for making sure that anytime an eyeball hits a screen, it's getting what it needs, and anytime that an eyeball can be driven to a particular screen, that's really where we thrive. So it was personally kind of a nice period of slowdown, if I'm honest. I really welcomed that change. Professionally, I don't think there was a period in our history where we've been busier.
So it's very clear on paper you got a lot going on. You're a managing director of a digital agency. You're a business strategist, entrepreneur. But if I was to put you in front of a bunch of 12-year-olds at career
Yeah,
day in a school, and the kid in the back of the room is like, "What do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
that's a great question. The best way I can say it is, if there's something that you really like or that you don't know that you could be turned on to, my job is to make that connection between whatever that thing is and your passion for it. And that works across brands, it works across products. I think it's funny because in the marketing space, and this is maybe my hot take, nothing really changes as a concept. Marketing as a principle, it doesn't change, just ways to market, kind of, that always evolves. So the best way I can describe what I do, especially if it was to a group like that, would be, I try to make meaningful connections between brands and products and their ideal customers.
So when you were in that position as a kid
Yeah,
in New York, what did you want to be when you grew up? What was your dream gig?
easy. That was a rock star. I was going to be a rock star. Yeah, and it's funny because I know you have an affinity for jazz.
Yeah.
I've since the age of 5. I'm a classically trained guitar player, so that has always been my hobby, my interest, my love for music. That's where it all started for me. So there was nothing that was going to be in my way of like joining either a famous rock band as this gunslinging sort of guitar hero. But that was easily where I wanted to path myself, and I sort of got into that sphere. I was in the music business for a couple of years, but I kind of fell into the marketing space and have been there ever since.
It's interesting. I live in the hometown of Pat Metheny. He went to the Frost School in Miami for a little while. There's kind of that cross pollination. So, who were you emulating in the music world? Who did you love?
But for me, it all goes back to two main artists. I think you really can't talk about modern rock and roll from the past couple decades without talking about Elvis Presley and the Beatles. And for me, that's where it started. My dad had actually recorded something on maybe a public broadcast about the Ed Sullivan Show, and kind of how important it was to not just the zeitgeist, and anything that was happening in entertainment, but how much it exposed artists to the world. And the first two artists that they kind of captured were Elvis Presley and the Beatles, and that for me, I was hooked. It's been a lifelong passion ever since.
I watched a documentary on Ed Sullivan recently, and we always get, we obviously know how big it was when those artists were on there. And even with the hips, they had it cut off and all that. But Ed was a
Right.
real hip, progressive dude. He really
Yeah.
fought to get musicians on there. Lots of people that were not just white. He was very prolific. And I had no idea, you know, that he wielded that level of influence. So I have to know, what was the first live rock show that you went and saw that absolutely blew you away?
Ooh, that's a great question. There are two that come to mind, and I'm sure that there are some that happened before it, but none were as impactful as these. We got tickets, these absolutely crazy tickets, and I really don't know the story behind how we got them, but I was able to see Paul McCartney live at the Hartford Civic Center, and I want to say February of 2002.
Wow.
Um, and that, as a Beatles fan, you're so close to everything that, like, he might as well have been a superhero. I mean, he's how do I compare to see this, to be this little kid looking up basically at the stage, because we're on the floor seats, and watching him play my favorite songs. And of course, as a kid, you just think that what you see on TV must be happening at that time. So I didn't understand why the Beatles weren't performing. I didn't understand any of that. It was just Paul McCartney, one of the Beatles. Okay, that's great. But I can remember sitting in those seats. It was like row F from the stage, and it was myself, my parents, and I had a shirt on with the American flag on it. He just took a look at me and he gave me a thumbs up, and I could have been that could have been the end of my life right there. It would have been great.
That was it.
And so that was one. And then the other one was actually a free concert, I think, that was given somewhere locally, which I don't know if you're familiar with Tommy James and the Shondells, which
Uh-huh.
is one of
Oh yeah.
one of my like go-to artists again from that time period. I love that music. And he was giving a concert, and we just happened to go. I got to shake his hand because he went through the crowd for a little bit during one of his songs, and just knowing that you could be that close, knowing that the music wasn't as far away as it maybe seemed, that was real impactful for me. So
So
those two.
yeah, I interviewed a jazz musician that was a part of like a jazz manouche, kind of a Django Reinhardt kind of outfit. And Paul McCartney was coming through Kansas City, and they knew he was at the hotel. They were at a fancy one, and it was outside, it was warm, and they were playing Beatles songs. And two of the biggest security guards they'd ever seen in their lives came down and said, "Paul's so appreciative that you're doing this, but he's got to sleep. You guys got to stop," right? Which
Well,
is kind of cool.
for anyone
What's
who
it?
bought a ticket that concert, they'll thank you that
Yeah,
he was able to sleep.
yes, exactly. Oh man. So I got kind of a question, kind of like off center a little bit here, that's about marketing. And I think you're the guy to ask this. Irregardless of how you feel about politics, I am totally fascinated as to how Donald Trump has been able to completely do whatever he wants to do from a marketing perspective. All of the people around him have created this image, and it's almost infallible. How did this happen? Is he just or him and the people around him, has he done it for so long he just knows how to do it?
I think there's something to that. But I think the thing that is making it so successful for him, is really around the fact that he had built a brand as who he was well before stepping into the role of politics.
Yeah.
You knew him as, um, you know, for lack of a better term, an eccentric, billionaire, someone who had clearly amassed a following for entertainment. And I think that same person is still very much with him as he makes his journey through politics. But I also think that he's done something that's been interesting to watch from the sidelines, where he's kind of created this sense of unpredictability, and people are always going to want to know what he's going to do next, whether or not they like it or dislike it.
True.
And you, I guess, by virtue of the fact that he does that, it's always going to elicit the response that it elicits, and it's always going to want to get someone interested, whether or not they will agree with what he says. um, but I think he's done, frankly, a good job of being consistent in that way. And again, politics aside, um, it's really a lesson in how to control a narrative, change a narrative if needed, but also to be as consistent as he is. That's something that I think a lot of brands should strive for within their general space.
That's what my lead in is. There's an infallibility to it. I mean, even if the press or anybody says anything, it's always there's this air of, well, they've always been against me. So no matter what happens, there's just like this absolute fail safe.
This
It's
impenetrable wall that can't
exactly.
necessarily be, that can't touch the brand in a
Uh-huh.
way that they feel is going to be, um, I guess, disadvantageous. But it's been an interesting lesson, and I think in marketing to watch this happen, because I think a lot of politicians have tried to do this, and some have done it successfully as well, but none to the level that he has. And again, it's not necessarily an endorsement by any means, but I
Sure.
do think it's interesting to watch. And this would be true for anyone who isn't in politics, anyone who has a mouthpiece like he does, like a platform like he does. It's impressive to kind of watch how well it turns, and it consistently moves in the same direction over and over again, even if it needs to pivot. But I think that's kind of where he shines, is being that unpredictable spirit that people will latch onto.
Uh-huh, for sure. So let's go back to your young days growing up in New York. What were the foundational elements of marketing and branding and being an entrepreneur? What were all those seeds that were planted that became you today?
Yeah, well, I guess maybe I was fortunate to grow up very close to a city like New York,
Yeah.
where you were exposed to everything, whether it was art or it was culture. All of it was there for you. And fortunately, my parents were both born in New York City, so they had I had a great runway going into the city frequently. And you would always see, advertisements. You would always see a lot of the large brands competing for space, essentially. And this, of course, is before the birth of the internet. So it always appealed to me that these large brands were doing something that literally seems so monumental. If you go to Times Square and you see all the billboards that are there, that's real estate that is capitalized upon every single second of every single day.
Hmm.
Um, how could a brand get to that level? What does it take to get your name posted across something that thousands and millions of people are going to see? That, to me, there was always an intellectual curiosity about that. And I think I liked the idea of being maybe something in the advertising space. But when I kind of fell into marketing was more as I was starting my professional journey, like through college or maybe towards the end of high school and through college. And when I started to understand the strategy that's involved, and how certain elements that come into play, can make or break a campaign, can make or break the success of a brand. That's when you start to kind of pick it apart and understand how it works at its most foundational level, and then be able to build and grow something from there. And fortunately, we've been able to do that on multiple levels with companies of all sizes and of all shapes. And that's been really exciting to be a part of.
I think that's why I loved watching Mad Men, because it was that whole old school world of just
Yeah.
billboards. There wasn't all this digital. And then I think being kind of a product of the 80s, like it was the beginning of things getting viral. Because Coke and Pepsi were basically the same thing. How did Coke become the behemoth? I mean, it's like even the Got Milk campaign. Like I
Yeah.
actually interviewed somebody that was a part of that campaign, and all they were trying to do was to get Californians to drink more milk. And then it just
Right.
completely becomes this behemoth. Like out of nowhere, and everybody's drinking milk. It's
And
amazing.
going back to what I was saying before, like even back then, before we had the real way to track attribution, it's still the same principle. Coke is still trying to appeal to that one person to go and
Yep.
pick up one of their products. Um, and there's something about the initial Got Milk campaign, as when it was geared for something that was much more localized than what it became, um, where the simplicity of that campaign, and the way in which it came across made a very, very strong connection that allowed them to grow in the way that they did. But that's really all it comes down to. It's you're still trying to create something that resonates very deeply on an emotional level with someone, so that you can, one, get them to take action with your brand, but two, get them to grow with you. It's not really just, you don't want someone to buy one Coke, you want them to buy a Coke for the rest of their life. So when you start that process of basically building a relationship on an individual level, that's kind of where the challenge is. And that's what I think is so exciting about the space. And as things evolve, as technology improves, and as technology just offers more options. The way in which you can create those relationships can be better enabled, can happen more efficiently. I think there's also something to be said of, to what degree you're creating that relationship. Certainly now, things are a lot more snackable. Attention spans are much shorter. But maybe the quality of that relationship isn't necessarily as strong as it used to be because there just really wasn't another opportunity. But that's kind of where we come in, is figuring out how to assess where the right place is to go, where to spend the time, where to spend the dollars, and find the most impact.
My favorite commercial as a kid growing up, and probably of all time, is when Mean Joe Green threw that jersey to that kid in
Sure.
the coat, right? So my question to you is this: what's one of your favorite marketing campaigns of all time?
Mm, that's a good one. Um, there are quite a few. There are some that I look back on, and even speaking with Mad Men, I mean, some of those are just iconic.
Yeah.
I think about Volkswagen, it's a lemon.
Uh-huh.
Think about It's Toasted. Those are some that I think, especially going through the thought process and helping to understand the concept. Um, that's where real marketing and creative shines. It's where you can latch onto something. Maybe you strike a little bit of humor. Maybe you elevate or highlight some element of a process that distinguishes it from any competitor. Those are the key attributes that make something successful and make it resonate. And that's why we talk about them 50, 60 years later, is
Yeah.
because they are that iconic. And what kid didn't want to be in the tunnel where he
Uh-huh.
throws the right? Like,
Yeah.
that was everyone wanted to be.
Yes.
Just hope for one moment, like, we go back to our conversation before. I would love if Paul McCartney would have been like, "Yeah, let's come up and jam on the next song,"
Yeah.
which I would have loved to do, and
Yes.
would have.
Yes. Of course. Of course. So who's been that hero, that inspirational force for you in your life to navigate you to this point, to find your place on this planet?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have to give a lot of credit to my parents, because they kept exposing me to certain things that would ultimately shape my interests, and they fostered those interests. I was a competitive fencer for a while, and without their backing, I don't think I would have been able to give myself over to the training to learn elements of discipline, to learn how to think strategically, to learn how to think a little bit more critically as well. And that's really set me up well for success. And the heroes that I've had along the way have not necessarily been the Paul McCartneys of the world, though of course he's included among them. But I think about my high school English teacher, in my senior year, who got me thinking about philosophy, and then obviously taking that one step further and studying philosophy in college. And my professors, Magnell and Lee, and what they've done for me and helping me to, I guess, get my brain to smile a little bit more. And then certainly along the way, I've been fortunate enough to work for some great managers and great leaders, who have helped kind of push me in the direction that I wanted to go. But I think it starts on a more homegrown level. But certainly there are people that I, aspire to look to. And it was funny that you bring this up, because I was listening to another one of your episodes. And I was like, well, if I had the opportunity to like invite someone to a dinner party and
Yeah.
they couldn't say no, who would it be?
Yeah.
Right. And certainly on the entrepreneurial track, I think, Tom Ford would be great to
Yeah.
talk to understand how he's, you know, changed his career a couple times, and then having the confidence to branch out on himself, to branch out by himself. Paul McCartney would be an easy choice.
Yeah.
um, Maybe a president from the last 20 years, someone who's seen a lot of change and had to lead through very difficult times and challenging times. um, I think that'd be a really good conversation.
So what is it that gets you up every day when the alarm clock goes off? What motivates you to do this work at a high level? Take care of your soul, yourself. How does all that work for you every day?
Yeah, I think the thing that motivates me is definitely, um, when you work for an agency, no day is going to be exactly the same. You're going to be working on a different client at a different hour of every single day. Maybe there'll be some continuity from yesterday into today, but I'm always up for what the next day is going to bring professionally. Certainly, there are challenges. There are parts of just operating a business that aren't as fun as doing the actual marketing work. But it's never going to be the same. I'm never going to be dealing with the same thing that I dealt with yesterday or the day that or the day after. So for me, I like the challenge. I like needing to be able to be as nimble and agile as I can be. And then obviously, if there's a way for me to really provide value that's going to push the brand forward, that's going to give it some momentum, then I'm absolutely up for that. And that's always really what drives it. I think at its core, it's being able to be that helpful, supportive partner. Um, you know,
So if you had a dream tonight and you walked into a room that when you were 13 years old and you clicked on an old film projector and there was like a 60-second highlight reel of the life you've lived so far, and the kids looking up confused and you're like, that's what's happened so far, would that young version of you believe it?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm very grateful for the path that I've had, and as I look back on it, I realize that if there were things that didn't work out the way I wanted, they were blessings in disguise because they ultimately got me to where I am. Um, and I'm very much looking forward for the next, couple decades as well. But I don't think I believe where I've landed. I know it's an interesting question because as I think through it, I realize how grateful I am for all of it.
So would you give that young version of you advice?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, that above all, perseverance and resilience will always, be your champions. Being able to lean on yourself, not not in a way that you can't lean on others, but to know that you can have full confidence in what it is that you're doing and how you're doing it, and what that's going to do to lead you to, maybe the next stage or the stage after that. Um, that there may be a plan in place you may not be aware of, but there is a path that's been set, and you're able to kind of. I guess the best way to put it is there's a track in front of you, but you get to build the train and figure out exactly how that should be run.
So when you think about that big huge glowing word retirement, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it's so funny because I know it's not as far away as I probably think it is, but I would love to look back on the professional life that I had and walk away with a sense of having been fulfilled enough to where my my time in retirement wouldn't feel like all of a sudden everything just stopped and now I'm bored. Now I'm really no stranger to having taken time off and thinking through what it is that I would do with my time if I just had loads of it. Um, but I also think that I'm the kind of person who would dive into other projects if I wasn't beholden to something that was a little bit more long term. So I guess I'm looking forward to that piece, but I know that there's a long road ahead, and I like where I'm at right now.
So I'm going to get into a fantastical realm again here. If you could go back in time and either be in the audience of that first Beatles show at the Ed Sullivan Theater or in Shea Stadium when they played,
Mm.
where would you want to be? What energy would you want to feel?
Ed Sullivan show for a couple of reasons. I'm sure the energy, and it's funny because I think I have a relative who's actually at that show at
Really?
Chase. Yeah. Um, you couldn't hear anything though. That's the
No, it
issue.
was deafening.
It was so loud that if I was there to actually watch them do what they were there to do, I'd want to have a more intimate setting in a theater where you have a better chance. I'm not saying that the sound would be any better there necessarily because it was still a bunch of screaming fans, but Shea Stadium was iconic, but it wouldn't have been what it was if they hadn't been on the Ed Sullivan Show first. That was the first exposure to the world, to at least the United States, and I would have loved to have been a part of that.
I mean, because there weren't that many people there. It was the beginning. It was the first American trip. That would be the place, without
Totally.
a doubt. You know,
Yeah. Sure.
so in the '90s they had a thing that came out. It was the Beatles anthology. Did you see that?
Yes, and I own a copy of it.
I did too, and I had it on VHS. I loved it. But they show during that show where kind of John Lennon starts losing his mind. I
Yeah,
don't know if
yeah.
you remember at that point, it got so loud and it was so zany that he almost kind of, I think they said he didn't perform much live after that. It was really a moment where things were weird because it was so loud. It was so, the cacophony of things that were happening was off the charts. No one had ever seen that before, you
Right.
know?
And imagine from his perspective, you've created this piece of art that has elicited this reaction in people you've never met before, and
Yeah.
not just a handful of people or a group of people, thousands, millions of people. Um, where like, how do you fathom that?
Yeah.
How do you square that?
Yeah.
And I know from all the research that I've done that they would have been happy being a club band.
Yep.
They would have been happy doing what they're doing as long as they were making a living. They didn't expect what happened. I don't think anyone could have, except maybe Brian Epstein. But
Yeah.
um, they for lack of a better term, they struck a chord with the world at just the right moment.
Yep.
And I don't know how you, as a regular person, who's thrust into stardom and fame, that's got to be difficult to manage.
Oh,
I couldn't imagine what he was going through.
yeah, it was crazy. So, of everything that you've accomplished in your life and everything that you've done and evolved to, what are you the proudest of?
Mm. As we recently welcomed our second son in February. He's about to turn 1, and I think creating my own family with a supportive partner like my wife. I think that's probably at this point what I'm most proud of. I'm really proud of having ascended to where I've ascended as quickly as I have. I know that it came with hard work and just the right situations that led me to where I'm at. But I think I'm most proud of right now. It's my kids and the family that we've created, and they're the legacy. So
Yeah.
um, I think that's probably where I would choose to put that.
All right, James. So everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I like to think I'm someone who provides a lot of value in multiple ways, not just for those who are paying for a service, but I'm a sounding board. I will be one to challenge assumptions, but I'll do it in a way that's going to offer the best opportunity for someone to learn and grow by themselves. But I also want to be that trustworthy, reliable team member who if I'm in your corner, I'm in your corner 100%. I like to think that's who I am. I like to think that's where I would continue to be. Um, but I think if you were to ask any of those individuals, I would hope that they would come up with a similar response.
So if anybody wants to dive into Big Drop, they want to ask questions, hire you, any of the good business, where do they go?
Yes. Awesome question. You can find us at bigdropinc.com. I'm on LinkedIn as well. You can find a lot of our content there. And definitely check out our Instagram because that's where we're putting a lot of effort behind that starting in a little bit. So that'll be a lot of fun things to share. But yeah, find us at bigdropinc.com.
Favorite Beatles album?
Um, is it cheating if I say the White Album because you kind of get 2 for 1?
Oh no, dude, that's on my list. I mean, are you
Yeah,
kidding? I mean,
it'd be the White Album for
yeah,
sure.
there was just so much fun. I mean, the whole thing was just too much. I mean, anyway, all of it's iconic, but that's wonderful. James, thank you, sir. This has been absolutely
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Thank you for taking a minute out. Best of luck. Have a great New Year, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. You too.
You bet. Hey.